Okay, let's run.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it.
It's a quest. It's a quest for fun.
Well, The Rock says, why don't we just cut right to the chase?
Okay, now he wants to get together. Well, he wants to talk.
I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me.
It's showtime, folks!
What are you?
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this new series we got going on here at Nerd Culture Channel. It's called Convention Chronicles, where we go back in time, talk about some of our favorite memories from all the conventions that we've been to over the last number of years. I am your host, Ryan of Nerd Culture, but I'm not alone in this. I have a co-host and a really good friend of mine and a friend of the show's who's going on this journey with us, and we are happy to have him here. Please welcome Jeff to the stage. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Hi, everyone. How's everybody doing today?
That's a great question. How are you doing today? You may be watching or listening to this. Let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. If you have any thoughts or opinions or fun facts you'd like to share with us, we're going to be talking about the differences between big versus small conventions. So let us know your thoughts in the comments or the chat. And if you're watching this live or on the replay, thank you for being here. And do not forget to like and share this with all of your closest friends. In the meantime, Jeff, my question to you is this. In your experience, what would you say are some of the positives and or negatives about attending big conventions?
Well, we're only about a month and a half away from the biggest one on the East Coast, and that's New York Comic Con. I would say the great thing about New York Comic Con is obviously you have the backdrop of New York City, and anywhere you go, you're going to be happy with whatever you eat. You know, there's so much to see and do in New York City, obviously outside of the Javits Center. But I do like the city atmosphere. I like how New York doesn't all jam everything into the Javits Center, or at least. So let's see. I started going to New York Comic Con in 2017. And I've been to every single one since then, outside of the leap year of COVID. And during that time, they did extend the Javits Center. So I think they are moving to just keeping more of the programming all centralized. But at one time, there were opportunities to go to like the Hammerstein Ballroom, all the way up to Madison Square Garden and the Madison Square Garden Theater. So that I thought those venues were really cool, and they're legendary venues. So for them to include the comic culture, I thought was really cool, especially when I sat in on the Walking Dead panel at Madison Square Garden. That was phenomenal. I remember sitting in on the Orville / Family Guy panel with my younger brother at the Hammerstein Ballroom, which is also legendary. So I really enjoyed that little change of pace. It's a little bit of a walk, but everything in New York is a walk away, but doing what I do, going to a big convention like that, there's just so many different parts and moving parts that I have to keep an eye on in order to be as organized as I can be to get everything that I'm there to do done, which I'm usually there to help purchase exclusives. I'm there to get signatures for clients who send in to me. And then, of course, I get to enjoy some of the show as well by going to those panels and by going to the booth experience, the experience booths. Basically, Ryan, do you know what I'm talking about when it's like an experience booth? You know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do know what you mean by that. And I also want to acknowledge someone in the chat, Tisiwong Dorje. They say New York Comic Cons are unique.
Yes, they are.
New York.
Yes. Welcome. So with the experience booths, I really think that's such a cool thing because one that really stands out to me, my younger brother and I, we did the Chucky experience booth. So basically, the line was pretty big, and it wrapped around the booth and everything. They would scan your badge, and then you go in, and basically you go into the an ice cream truck that Chucky supposedly took over, and you go in, and you're walking into basically a murder scene, and you're supposed to look around, and then all of a sudden he pops up out of the ice chest to scare you, and that's when they take your photo, and so it's really like you said, unique in that experience. I know that I did one for Saw, I did one for Stargate Universe, some really cool ones. So I like the fact that you can go and take a picture and have a keepsake for free just because you stood in a line for 10-15 minutes and you jumped in, and those were kind of the fun little things I would do with my younger brother. And then of course, just to get off of our feet and really do something significant, that's when we would sit in on panels. So I will say, the best panel I got to experience was the Ghostbusters Afterlife panel. There were rumors going around earlier that day. A lot of the vendors and my friends were saying, hey, whatever you do, don't miss the Ghostbusters. And, I was like, okay, all right, I'll make sure I get over there, and this was a theater in the new wing of Javits Center, and it was packed. I mean, it was just every seat was taken, and the really cool thing was that the majority of the cast was there. That's how New York is. They go big, but to be introduced to Ivan Reitman, that was really, really cool. Especially because I think he passed about 6 months after that. So there was a moment up there between him and his son where they were talking about how Ivan gave his son the go-ahead to create this new chapter in the Ghostbusters. That's a really big Twinkie. and he he said, hey, I like this idea. I like where you're going with it. Go with it. And it was just it was a moment to see as a fan, and just to see as a human being, seeing that relationship between father and son, who, I mean, look at the creative minds that you had up there between just the two Reitman men. It was one of those things where it was like, wow, I'm not an emotional guy. Well, that's not true. I'm not a guy who cries, but I'm an Italian. We get emotional. So you got like a, oh my God, but that was really touching. And then Ivan's son went into discussing how he had this vision of the little girl in the field. He doesn't know why she's there, but she's somehow linked to this Ghostbusters universe. And he built the whole story just around that one little scene that I think he said he saw it in a dream, and he pitched that to his dad, and his dad said, go ahead and make the movie. And the majority of the cast was there. I think all of the kids were there. And I think I'm forgetting names right now. I'm sorry, buddy, but I know the mom was there. But that was it. None of the original Ghostbusters showed up. So then all of a sudden they said, and we're going to show you the full length movie right here. You're going to be the first ones to get to see the movie. I've never experienced anything like that. And to sit in on that chapter of Ghostbusters with no idea what I was going to see, totally no trailers, nothing. It was just put up on the screen, and it was just all of us as a group of fans and a community, which that's the one thing I love about comic conventions is it's a community. We all sat and watched this brand new movie together. laughed at the same time, got a little, oh, when the more heartfelt moments came up, and it was just such a cool experience to share that with such a large group of people in the dark, like in a movie theater, and just, it was like almost like one of those true movie theater experiences, you see in movies where people are like, haha, and then they're throwing popcorn at the screen and all that stuff. That never actually happens in an actual movie theater, but that was kind of as close as it got to the Hollywood viewing of a movie versus, the actual everyday movie viewing experience. I thought that was so cool. And that's something that can only happen at a convention as big as New York Comic Con, where they're going to get like 90% of the cast to show up and sit down and talk about how much they experienced and what they enjoyed about the projects that they're on and everything. You only see that at New York. Now what I compare New York to is about a month later in Rhode Island Comic-Con. My goodness, that is such a massive. I can't imagine being the person to organize Rhode Island Comic-Con or New York Comic-Con. The amount of work that these people put into to create such an experience for fans and like us to enjoy. I mean, they must be working 80 hours a week every week from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. I don't even think they take time off. The amount of time and money and planning and expenses and everything that they go through to get to that convention is phenomenal. But New York is definitely the entertainment convention, right? It covers all the bases, the experiences. The comic, artist alley is just stacked with almost 100 comic book writers and artists and cover artists and everything else. You've got just the biggest venue on the third floor with the vendors of good thousands of vendors, and then you've got the experience booths. Whereas Rhode Island is a little bit more geared towards the comic industry, where they will get a stacked guest list of 30 to 40 guests. Obviously, if you're interested in going to Rhode Island, I would say it's great on the budget, because most of the guests that you want to meet are going to be within about $40 to $60. Which is, I mean, that's great. And if you look on their website right now, you can see that they've already posted I think about 80% of the people who are going to be there already. And it's already like 30 people mentioned. It's a reasonable convention. It's all centralized. It's either in the Dunkin' Donut arena, where they keep most of the headline guests, and then in the hotel side of things, it's 3 floors. And 1 floor is mainly the second tier guests, and then of course there's several guests on the vendor floor as well. It doesn't have as big of a artist alley, but they do get a good amount of big names, from legends to hot comic artists and comic writers of modern day. So if you go there, the really cool thing is they try to get more so like a group of related people. Like there's going to be 2 to 3 people from the same show or the same movie, just so that, for people like me, chasing after cast signed pieces all the time, it's a nice, like, centralized, but huge convention where you can knock off a lot of projects pretty easily. The vendors there are always very happy to be there. They're coming off of the heels of New York Comic Con, most of them. So it's nice. They have their usual setup there, and they know what they're doing. And I've gotten to know some of the bigger vendors, and they really go out of their way to bring the products out for everybody to enjoy and purchase. So, but yeah, Rhode Island, that's definitely one I would highly recommend as far as like big conventions go. Obviously, New York is the bread and butter. And I think those are probably the two biggest conventions I've attended. They're worth the drive. I'm coming from central Pennsylvania. New York is probably about 3 hours away, and then Rhode Island is about 6. But it's worth the drive. Once I went, I was like, oh, I'm probably gonna have to come back here a couple times. So, but Ryan, have you been able to make it to Rhode Island? Or I know that you and I experienced fan expos and Keystone Comic Con, so I know you've at least experienced those big ones like me. Those are pretty big shows too. So, what do you think, buddy?
Yeah, for me, I haven't been to, full disclosure, never been to the big one, the WrestleMania one, San Diego Comic Con. Never been to New York Comic Con and the Javits Center, respectively. Never been to Dragon Con, which is another one of the biggest shows on the planet, which is actually going down in another week or two.
Yep.
So that's coming up very soon. And I know a lot of my friends are going to be down there vending. I wish you the best of luck. Make lots of sales, have a lot of fun, but please be safe at the same time.
Yeah.
So as far as big conventions go, I've had my fair share. Yeah. I've been to some big parties, big shoots. So here's my deal. I've been to some big conventions, and to give everyone an example, and once again, we're talking about the differences and the positives and or the negatives between big versus small conventions on this episode of Convention Chronicles. If this is your first time here, welcome. Do not forget to like and share this with all of your closest friends. If you have any thoughts about this, maybe some intriguing stories you've been privy to, maybe some stuff that you've experienced in your times at conventions, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. We're more than happy to hear from you. And for those of you who are commenting in the chat, thank you. We greatly appreciate it. My experience with big conventions is this. One of the first conventions I went to was Lexington Comic and Toy Convention in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yeah. Okay.
That to me is a big show because not only do they have that space within the convention center, also the hotel is connected to the convention center in Lexington, which is the Hyatt, #not a sponsor. But then you have the Rupp Arena, and they just expanded to the Rupp Arena in the last few years. So they got like 2 or 3 spaces full of celebrities and vendors and artists and independent writers and publishers and all that jazz. And I was taken aback by that at first, but I eventually got used to it as I made my way around the convention floor. And that happens with everybody. If you go to a convention, big, small, doesn't matter. You're going to be overwhelmed by all the sights and the sounds and what you see. But once you take it all in, it gets a bit easier over time. So Lexington was a big show. I had a lot of fun with that. As far as even bigger shows, I've had the privilege of being at AwesomeCon, which is in Washington, D.C. That is a huge... you want to talk like Super Bowl, you want to talk like World Series of baseball, maybe World Series of poker for those of you who are card sharks. So that convention center has it's 300,000 square feet. That's a lot of ground to cover in 3 days. You see what I'm saying? You got to go down. First of all, you got to go in through the street level. Then you got to go like down a floor to get to your badges and all that stuff. Then you got to go down another set of escalators and another set of escalators just to get to the main floor. And once you see the main floor, it's pretty much it's kind of like saying it's bigger than the hangar of a Star Destroyer. Okay. It is humongous. So AwesomeCon, I think, is a really good show. However, the things that I've run into, and we can kind of get into this as well if you want, the negatives for me for big versus small. So for big conventions, here's the positives. You got a lot of big fish, some of the biggest names in Hollywood, and I mean mega names. I mean, Lexington has had Ian McDermott. They've had Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
They've had professional wrestling legends like Jim Cornette and The Stinger. They've had Sting. They've had Kevin Nash, some of the other big name stars that have been wrestling for decades and decades and decades. They've been in those buildings. And those lines they can get pretty long. It depends on it depends on which person you're there to see, with all due respect, because every person has their own. Let's just say this. If you're going to a convention, put together an itinerary, because that'll keep you on track of who you need to hit up, who you don't need to hit up, and then who you need to meet up with as far as your friends, your connections, your what have you.
Mhm.
So Lexington, I think is a good show. I think you should check it out. Awesome Con's another really good show. But the flip side of that is when you get big names, some lines are too long. Some lines don't have a cutoff.
No.
Some lines go forever. And when you see how long those lines get, it interrupts other foot traffic.
Yeah.
And it throws people off because they think, is this line for everybody? No, 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 no. This line's for one person. Now, granted, some conventions are better at organizing their lines than others. But I will say, Andy Serkis, his
Oh.
line goes from here all the way. Like, it's literally the length of a football field. That's how bad it gets.
Yeah.
So if you're going to meet a celebrity, try to get there first thing in the morning. Like, try to get there as soon as you can, because those lines are going to be so long. You're going to need chairs. You're going to need and this is another thing. Bring bottled water, or bring a tumbler. Is that what they're called?
Mhm.
A tumbler
Yeah.
full of water or an energy drink to get you through the day, because you're going to be standing on your feet for hours on end, and you need to be prepared for that. So there's your friendly neighborhood tip. But the plus side is big conventions have big names. You're able to meet some of the stars you've waited many, many years to meet. Some of them may be pro athletes. Some of them may be voiceover actors like Frank Welker or Peter Cullen, people who've been doing Transformers and other properties for decades. Awesome Con's a good show. Another one I've been to that's a big show, a big convention, I should say, because I'm trying to keep this on the track here. Let's see. There's been Lexington. There's been Awesome Con. Fan Expo. There's another example. You and I have experienced this too. Jeff and I have been at Fan Expos together.
Yeah.
So Fan Expo, the first time I went was a few years ago, right? It was in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. It's the city that loves you back. It's always sunny in Philadelphia. So when I went to sunny, I'm sorry, stop making me laugh. So, and by the way, Tswang Dorji, we will get to your question here in a moment, because that is a very important question that I'm going to address here. So, in regards to Fan Expo, they had some of the biggest names in the entertainment industry, but the best thing that I thought that they did well was the lines were moving.
Yeah.
Lines were moving. They didn't dilly-dally. They didn't lose control of the lines.
No.
They didn't have any arguments with people. I didn't have any arguments with the people who were running. And by the way, the people who volunteer at these conventions, they're busting their tails. So give them some credit, because they're on their feet for hours on end, and they have to keep running.
The key word is volunteer. Keyword is volunteer.
That's another thing. They don't get paid for any of this. I mean, they get some perks with their volunteer signups. Do not get me wrong, but overall, they're not getting paid for this. This is volunteer work. So, what I was saying was, if you ever get a chance to visit a Fan Expo show, specifically, I mean, the one I've only been to is Philadelphia, so I can't speak for Fan Expo Chicago. I can't speak for Fan Expo. I think another one is in New Orleans, if I'm not mistaken. There's Fan Expo Boston, right?
Yep.
There's Boston. There's Boston, Massachusetts, where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. I can't speak to that because I've never been to Boston. But what I can say is that Philadelphia knows how to run their lines. And I said, and at the end of the show, I thought to myself, I wish more conventions would take their P's and Q's from Fan Expo.
Yes.
Because they keep the line, like, they do not mess around. They put you in your spot where you have to be. They tell you some of the rates. If you can't see the signs that are standing on the celebrities, what do they call them? Their booths. That's it. And I respect that about people. When people give me a heads up on what's going on, that means you're running that's a system. If you have a good system, you're going to have good business. If your system is flawed, then, well, you know what happens. Wizard World, we're looking at you. So that's been my experience at big conventions. The positives are you get big names, but the flip side of that is certain lines are too long to the point where you don't even want to be there anymore. You just want to get out of Dodge. So just be prepared about who you want to meet, why you want to meet them, and what signatures are most important, because that's going to determine who you see and then where you go within a convention. I want to address someone's question here. It's a Swan Dorje. By the way, thank you for being here, young person. We appreciate it. They have a question. This is in regards to autographs. Have the Funko Pop scalpers soured the experience for autograph hunting / acquiring? Jeff, your thoughts?
Wow, that's a great question. So because of what I do, I think some folks kind of get a misinterpretation of what I do. A lot of times, like I've mentioned before, I take consignments. So basically, not only am I taking my own personal items to get signed, but I'm also trying to help fans from Facebook groups obtain signatures that they want. So they'll send me an item and they'll have specific requests. I always say, hey, I'm going to do the best I can for you. But I can't guarantee that signer is going to sign a specific way or sign and include all of the requests that these somebody asks for. But I always say, hey, I'm going to go to bat for you as best as I can. And Ryan has seen me firsthand that I'm pretty darn successful at it, which is kind of why I call the business iconic autographs and inscriptions. But I think what your question is more so about how Funko's, number one, I think what you're referring to is kind of how the pop hunters are out there and they get the bots going and they buy up all the convention exclusives before anybody else can get them. You got to remember when it comes to when it comes to collectibles, that's kind of one of those like necessary evils that are going to end up happening. I know that when I go to New York Comic Con, I'm very aware that there are vendors who send about 2 to 3 guys into each line to buy up as many exclusives as they can so that they can turn around and make a profit on those. I wouldn't go as far as saying so here, this is the way I kind of relate it to. Years ago, when I go to concerts, my first concert I went to was in Chicago when I was 15. And I remember walking by a couple of guys saying, tickets here, and same thing with baseball games in downtown Chicago and football games. There's always somebody standing out there trying to sell or resell tickets. Hey, over the years, I was like, oh, what's this guy doing? That's kind of lousy. But then over the years, in Pennsylvania, we had a governor say, hey, if you have Penn State tickets and you're a Penn State ticket holder, you should be allowed to sell those tickets at a profit because they're an investment, and you should be able to sell those tickets at a higher price because you paid for the tickets, you can't go. So why are you then selling them? Now, the Alumni Association says you have to sell them at face value. Most people don't. It's just how it goes. But I look at it like this. At some point, somebody did the work to get that item. They stood in line for 2, 3, 4 hours and had to battle a couple hundred other people just to get the 2, 3 purchases in and then jump back in line or whatever the case may be. People did work for that particular collectible. So I know that, like, oh, this person bought up 6. He doesn't need 6, and he just wants the one, and he's just going to sell it and make a profit. Well, a lot of times, that's the work they're doing to put food on their table, and remember, they're not really getting a huge profit. They had to pay for the admission tickets. They had to pay for the booth, or they had to pay the parking. They had to travel there. They have to pay the hotels. So, if that's their way of funding themselves to go to a convention, to enjoy a convention, or to help pay for things on the side, and let's be honest, the majority of us adults are working 1 to 2 jobs already. Sometimes the stuff that we do at conventions, it's also work. So, do you think it's fair for somebody to go and buy a $15 pop and then turn around and sell it at $15 when they stood in line for 3 hours outside waiting to get into the convention, then got onto the Funko line? I have friends who've done that, and it is a lot of work, and to make sure that those items are undamaged, coming from a massively busy floor, running back to the booth, putting it in a safe place at the booth for the next 2 to 3 days, then transporting it back to wherever they live, and then, having to put in the time to list it and then pack it and ship it. I think, I don't really look at it more as like scalpers or unfair practice. I think it's just those folks were there at the time and they were able to pick up those items. Now where I kind of, that's kind of, I see that kind of as the gray area, where I see where it goes beyond where I think it's not right. Perfect example. Unfortunately, the wrestling world had two major losses this earlier this week. One was Terry Funk, and the other was Bray Wyatt. Terry Funk obviously was a wrestling legend who was around for I think at least 5 or maybe 6 decades, and obviously a legendary name. And he was very well known on the convention circuit. So he would do wrestling conventions. He would do pop culture conventions, Comic-Cons. And he was a big signer. He loved his fans. He would sign for people at those shows, everything. I saw people, as soon as the announcement of his passing, you go on eBay and you see people trying to sell his signature for an exorbitant amount of money, where, he was signing for, let's say, $10 that day. Now I'm on eBay looking and somebody's trying to sell his signed action figure for $600. Now his family's not getting 1% of that profit that person's making, because he just passed away and now you can't get a signature anymore. But on the flip side, there's somebody who's willing to pay for it. And that's where, that's the give and take of the industry and the scalpers and stuff like that, where I do think there should be a certain level of respect for somebody who just passed away. In regards to Bray Wyatt, he only did a couple of appearances outside of WWE. So he was a much rarer signer, and he was a super popular talent. His passing was a shock to the wrestling world. There were rumors, he hasn't been feeling well with an unknown illness, whatever. But I went onto eBay as soon as I saw his announcement. Within 30 minutes, there were probably between 50 to 100 listings of things that he signed, whether it was Funko Pops, whether it was the PSA cards or the slabbed cards, or even the stills. People were selling those things for a couple hundred, several hundred. One person, I believe, had a signed Funko Pop with the inscription "The Fiend" somewhere around $4,000. That's where I'm like, that's egregious. That's really taking advantage of a man who is 36, 37. I'm 43. I can't imagine what that's like for a family to lose such a young, big-hearted piece of their family, and now you're talking about somebody who got maybe 10 seconds of his time to sign something and got it certified by JSA or PSA or Beckett, and they're trying to make a buck on this. And it's one of those things where that's where, to me, I'm saying to myself, come on, let's remember this guy was a human being, that he has 2 small children. He's leaving behind a young wife. As I've gotten older, I don't know, Ryan, if you've experienced this, but I have lost friends along the way at young ages. I would have a really hard time swallowing that pill or biting my tongue from saying something about that. If I found out, somebody decided to sell something that my friend gave them and they passed away at 36 or 37 to make a quick buck, that to me is where I get kind of, I don't know, upset with the industry of autographs and collectibles, where when we turn around and we can't respect somebody's privacy, they did this, or this was what happened. Come on, there's got to be a line. So that, I think that's what I saw this week, especially the Bray Wyatt thing was like, ugh, come on. I would sometimes eBay steps in and actually forces people who are selling on there to in those cases to pull it down. But obviously they can't regulate every single thing that's going to go up on the website. We all know that. But again, there's going to be somebody who wants to put it up for sale at that price, but there's always going to be somebody who's willing to pay that price because they see that there's a certain amount that they're willing to spend and they have it in their budget. So, God bless to those people, but that's what you're going to end up seeing with the I guess the scalping side of the industry. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Ryan? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I do think it's disrespectful to start putting up products on eBay listings or other websites as soon as a person passes away. And by the way, rest in peace to legendary wrestlers Terry Funk and Bray Wyatt was the other one. So rest in peace to those two wrestlers. I watched a few matches with Terry Funk towards the end of WCW's run when he came in trying to help the company. It didn't help anybody, but listen, it's not his fault. It was management's fault. And Bray Wyatt, I know he had a good run WWE. He was also known as The Fiend, I believe, was one of his characters, where he wore like a creepy mask trying to kill people. I don't know. I'm not really into horror movies there, Bray Wyatt, but hey, you played a character and you did it pretty darn well. So
brilliant.
Good on you. Yeah, that's creepy stuff, man. With the little lantern. No, like the giant lantern from like 1832. Like, and pay for you, whatever it was. I don't know. But to answer the question, yes, it's disrespectful. It's immoral. It's unethical. Don't do it. I mean, granted, we can say that, but there's always going to be the dark side of the force. There's always going to be flippers, right? There's always going to be scalpers that are trying to make mad money, right, on the interwebs, trying to do their thing. Go to Vegas, put the money on the ponies, put the more, if I have to bet the mortgage on the house tonight, I'm going to go with this, whatever. So it's not working. Don't do it. And thank you for that question, to Swang Dorje. Thank you very much for that question. Great question. Here's a follow-up to that, though. And once again, I'm going to turn things over to Jeff because Jeff knows more than me because he's been around for over 400 years. We're 900 years. You reach look as good. You will not. So no, I'm not going to look as good as this guy. So, and by the way, this is Convention Chronicles on Nerd Culture Channel. Don't forget to like and share this with all of your closest friends. If you have any thoughts about the differences between big versus small conventions and the experiences that you've had over the years, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Let us know your questions, because we love hearing those. We like taking them, and we really, really appreciate your interaction with us and your feedback as well. So if there's something else you want to see on the show, if there's another topic that you would like Jeff and I to discuss, by all means, let us know in the comments. So my question to you is this, and this is something I've noticed over the years that I've been going to conventions myself, especially at the bigger shows, the big conventions. We're gonna stay on this topic of big conventions for just a quick moment here, and then I want to transition over to small conventions because we want to give the underdogs some love here in the house. So, here's an example: Rosario Dawson, one of the biggest names in Hollywood right now, and I mean gigantic names in Hollywood. Case in point, Ahsoka. Yeah. So my question is, do you think it is smart or is it fair when an actor or actress who has starred in previous properties and they have a set, what am I trying to say here? Cost for getting an autograph or a selfie, for example. Let's say an autograph selfie combo, right? Now that Rosario Dawson's in this giant property known as Star Wars, and she's been doing it for the last 2 years with her appearances in Mandalorian, and then she eventually got her spin-off series, which just dropped more recently on Disney+, #not sponsor. Do you think it's fair when actors and actresses, their prices get like 3 levels jacked up after they show up in a new property or a known property, but they've just been cast in that property? Because I find it interesting that someone that I've seen in Power Rangers, for example, people like Austin St. John, Karen Ashley, Walter Jones, all those legendary Rangers, they're great people, by the way. They're great people. I've had the pleasure of sitting down and talking with them a little bit. They're great, and they have set rates. But even if they star in other projects and they do independent films, maybe if they even do something that's widely distributed, for example, I don't see them jacking up their prices. But with other actors and actresses, it seems that their prices go up by 3 or 5-fold. Do you think that's fair? Do you think it's right for them to do that? Or do you think there's something else going on that we're not privy to, Jeff?
So When I used to have that same thought process, and I've been, like I said, I've gotten to network and connect with a lot of different folks who, hey, I've only been going to conventions since about 2015, but I've been able to make a lot of connections to vendors and people who can tell you. I remember when this was a convention in a basement of a church, stuff like that. And you listen to I always like to listen to people, especially when I'm at one of the bigger conventions and I'm on a line for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. I like to engage in getting to know other people around me in the same line or across from me or whatever. So your question is you're going to laugh at this. My friend and I, Joe, he's been a vendor for a long time, and he's evolved his vending table from, being a comic dealer to distributing other types of collectibles, and now he sells the minis. He and I laugh about this, and we've come up with a term for it. In Rosario's defense, she is now privy to the Star Wars tax. And what we mean by that is, okay, Rosario Dawson's IMDb profile or career resume, whatever you want to call it, is stacked. I mean, she's been in so many big projects, so many big roles, and you just know who she is by her name. Does that, and now stepping into this iconic role of Ahsoka is just the next step into her career. Think about it this way. Do you think Jonathan Keyquan's going to keep his price at between 40 and 60 now that he's an Oscar winner? Probably not, because
Probably
now, he can increase his price because he's now more in demand. Same thing with Brendan Fraser. I was very, very lucky. I was very, very lucky to meet Brendan Fraser last year at New York Comic Con and only pay $80 for his autograph. Now, $80 is outside of that sweet spot of 40 to 60, but it's Brendan Fraser, and he was on the verge at that time of winning the Oscar. There was a lot of buzz around him, and they're like, get him now because he's going to be going up in rates. I saw it happen with Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa was, I think, somewhere around $80, $60 to $80 at New York Comic Con when I met him. And then the next year when Aquaman came out, boom, he was double that at 160. So that's kind of what happens is if you don't catch him early, and obviously it's not fair to say, well, you should have gotten him back when because he didn't do that or she didn't do that project. So you didn't know to get her to sign an Ahsoka helmet or an Ahsoka lightsaber or whatever the case may be, because it wasn't in the works yet. Nobody knew. But now, because you're talking about one of the biggest franchises in Hollywood history in Star Wars, you're going to end up paying for that price, and you're going to pay a pretty penny to get her to sign merchandise from the show or from the Star Wars universe, because what I've learned over the last several years of my going to conventions was I understand that, when you're first going, you start having them sign like a common Funko Pop, or you have them go, or you get it like an 8x10. You start realizing those things kind of start stacking up, and they don't really hold a lot of value. Like if we were talking about resellers and scalpers, on the flip side of things, let's say, we get to the point where we want to downsize our collection, or we want to sell off some things because we're just not into that anymore. Or God forbid, we passed away and we decided to hand off our collections to our loved ones, and now they have all this stuff and they don't know what to do with it. A lot of times these things go to auction houses, and auction houses sell off those items. I'm kind of one of I'm a bit of a statistical type of person. I like to go onto those auction websites and pick up things that you can't get anymore because, let's say, that talent just isn't around anymore. It's just that person doesn't do appearances or whatever the case may be. You start to notice what holds value and what doesn't. So, hey, I'm sure I've experienced it too. It's you go to meet somebody, you're really excited, and you're really new to the whole convention scene. You don't know what to bring to have them sign, so you just get an 8x10. And the 8x10 is nice. A lot of times they personalize it to you, and you have a nice little back and forth with that person. But here's the thing: when an autographed item with your name on it comes up on an auction site, unless it's somebody who's really, really rare, like I'm talking like a Lou Gehrig or a Mickey Mantle, it's going to be really hard to sell that item at an auction and get any of the money you put into it back. Now, if you happen to run into Clint Eastwood, he's just going to sign something and hand it back to you. That's going to be worth a good amount of money, right? So that's kind of what I started doing. So, in the background, you can see a couple of things already in cases and stuff behind me. And I have learned to get items that are, limited edition or whatever the case may be, or exclusives, and have those get signed by the person I want to meet, because I know that they're going to hold a little bit more value than the common everyday, $12 Funko Pop that they mass produced or an 8x10, because you'll see after a while that you're going to see a number of celebrity guests start doing repeat shows, and the more they sign, the less value you have in that item. So if you're getting like a common item signed all the time, you're probably not going to be able to, break even on that. Now, I have a certain style. I like to talk with the signer, and if there's time, have them use different paint colors on my Funko Pop, or I like to find a specific quote that I really enjoy because that's my connection to that item. So a perfect example is it's not a popular movie, but it was a movie I grew up with. It was called Men at Work. I just went to Monster Mania specifically to meet Keith David because I have this really cool teaser poster of Men at Work already signed by Charlie Sheen. And Charlie wrote, "And the air is just right for drinking," which is one of his more recognizable quotes from the movie. And he wrote the character name out underneath, and that's my style. I had Keith David write his line that I love from that movie, and I still remember to this day, as seeing that movie when I was 6, and it's almost 35 years later. He wrote, "Somebody threw away a perfectly good white boy," and that's exactly the scene right there. And he wrote it out on the poster, and it looks great. That's just my style. That's my connection to that movie, and I still remember to this day how funny it was to me when I was little. And if you think about it, the line is still pretty hilarious nowadays as well. It aged well. But that's kind of my way of doing things. I like having that interaction instead of having somebody say, "To Jeff, all the best," or hugs and kisses, or whatever the case may be, or whatever they best wishes, whatever they write. I like to have that personal connection with that signer where I say, "Hey, I loved this line when you said it. It just rang to me," and that's I'm kind of, I have a detailed way of about me. I majored in history in college, so I remember facts and dates and times really well. I can remember specific quotes and stuff like that pretty quickly. So I always have fun being able to quote favorite movies and favorite stuff like that with friends. I get a kick out of it, especially when somebody goes, "Oh, I know that one." Like earlier today, I was leaving the middle school, and I said something about, "I'm here to kick-assing chew bubble gum, and one of the secretaries was like, "Oh, don't run out of bubble gum." So I was like, "Oh, they live, Roddy Piper. That's great." So, but that's the thing about pop culture is you never know what you're gonna spit out that somebody else is gonna be like, "Oh, I know that one," And that's what I love about that convention communities is we're all like that. We all have that sense of like growing up in the 80s and you heard that iconic "I'm Batman" line, it just rings with you for the rest of your because you're a fan and you fell in love with those characters and those actors and actresses. But it's the same thing with Star Wars. Star Wars is iconic. So it's funny that you bring that up because my first convention, my first big convention was New York Comic Con. I want to say 2017 when they had Mark Hamill there. And, I was used to seeing prices of like between $40 and $60. Here comes Mark Hamill at $295. And I didn't know how much he was going to be. And I certainly didn't plan for that. So I got to meet Mark Hamill, but I still have something I need him to sign, and I'm waiting for him to come back. So that's sort of how it works, though. Once they hit that Marvel level or the Star Wars level or even the DC level, you're going to see those prices go sky high because those are the iconic roles that we all fall in love with, and those are the ones that we want to enshrine in whatever item that we have them sign, because we're gonna put that in a frame. We're gonna respect that. We're gonna have that on our wall. We're gonna have it in a we're not gonna put it in just like a little pop protector. We're gonna put it into the armor case and everything else. Those are like I've seen people go up to signers like Oscar Isaac and Sebastian Stan, Tom Hiddleston and Stanley, and literally break down in tears because they know that this is a special person. I mean, Mark Ruffalo, same thing. And Paul Rudd, they all have this effect on us that it's just you're in the presence of greatness, and they've played characters that mean so much to us that now we get to experience 30 seconds to 2 minutes at most. Even the Tom Holland experience was similar. And when you get to meet these people in real life, they seem like they're bigger than life, just sitting in front of you. So yeah, you're gonna end up having to put out a pretty penny to go meet Rosario Dawson now because hey, she's playing one of the most iconic modern Star Wars characters of the era. So yeah, you're gonna pay the Star Wars tax.
Oh, the Star Wars tax! Get out of here with your Star Wars tax. No, it's a lot more than Republic credits. All right, guys, it's a lot more than Republic credits, like they say in the Star Wars galaxy far, far away. And once again, this is Convention Chronicles, hosted by Ryan and Jeff here on Nerd Culture Channel. Don't forget to like and share this with everyone you know. If you have any thoughts about your experiences at big or small conventions, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. Whether you were joining this live or on the replay, thank you for being here. And thank you to everyone who has commented thus far. You got a point, yeah. If they star a few properties, that's one thing. But when they hit the big times in the upper echelons of pop culture, whether it's DC, Marvel, Star Wars, which are, basically your top three, I mean, those are kind of the top three. I mean, unless there's another property. I mean, there's a few others out there, but those are like three of the ones that are most discussed amongst fans on what do you call them? The interwebs. Thank you. So I hear what you're saying, but it's still not fair. It's not bloody fair. It's just not fair because here's the thing, and I've noticed this online too. Here's another show I've been to. We didn't get a chance to discuss this, but GalaxyCon is a big show. GalaxyCon, that's a big one, right? I've been to two of them. I've been to Richmond and I've been to Raleigh. There's a few differences, but there's also a few similarities. And my problem is Richmond was very chaotic. They didn't really know how to manage the lines in the pro photo op line. Now, granted, I wasn't getting any pro photo ops that particular weekend, but I know people who were.
Yeah.
and they had to wait, and there were problems. They were backed up. The timing was off. Something wasn't right. Richmond wasn't working at the time. And then I go to Raleigh a few months later, and Raleigh was a lot of fun. Do not get me wrong. I had so much fun at GalaxyCon Raleigh, but I will warn you, it was the highest grossing GalaxyCon for Raleigh so far in its history. It was oversold. It was overbooked. It was insane because you have a number of different rows that have celebrities in them, right? They do rows with different celebrities for different genres, different fandoms. Like, for example, voice actors. They're going to be in one section, right? You're going to have puppeteers and actors who are a part of the Jim Henson company. They're going to be in a separate row, like Steve Whitmire, you know, and a few of the others. By the way, Steve Whitmire is a great guy. I'm not dogging anybody for this. But the problem is, when you overbook and you oversell, especially at big conventions, just to stay on big conventions for just another second here. We seem to be having too much fun with this big convention thing, but it's a problem because they had to move Mae Whitman's booth from one corner of the convention center to another because they didn't know how long her line was going to get. It's Mae Whitman. Mae Whitman doesn't do a lot of shows. She really doesn't. I mean, I don't see her on any lineups. For her to show up in Raleigh, which, by the way, I got a chance to meet her. She was cool. She was great. Mae Whitman, we love you. So that was a problem. And then the photo ops, for me anyway, weren't a problem. It wasn't the photo op lines that were a problem because they knew what they knew that the guy who was running the microphone and the PA system telling people, hey, we got so-and-so in 15 minutes. Hey, we got so-and-so right now. Get in line, get in line. He was good. He was really good. They were really good at that. But the lines in Celebrity Row were and the tapes that they put on the floor to mark where the lines are, it zigzags. And it's very complicated. And there's the VIP Fast Pass lane, if you know what I'm talking about. And then there's the general admission, right? It was too chaotic, and they had to keep people moving through the convention floor where certain portions of the lines were because they didn't want it to get, what is it called? Turn into a mosh pit. But what do you expect people to do when they're lined up like that? And what do you expect people to do who are trying to get in that line? They are moving, yes, but like, what do you expect them to do? You know, so it was very chaotic. It was very messy. Between Fan Expo and GalaxyCon, as much as fun as I had at both GalaxyCon Richmond and GalaxyCon Raleigh, you really need to manage your lines better. And you need to have a better line of communication with your people who are running the line, your volunteers. Because people were complaining online that there was a lack of communication. And I think that needs to be worked on for future shows. Specifically, Richmond is a big one, and Raleigh too. I mean, definitely, there's no question about Raleigh, but Richmond and Raleigh, the two R's. You see the similarities here, Jeff. The two R's. Get your stuff together. Get your communications line together, because when you overbook and you sell too many tickets, and then to the point where you're selling like afternoon only tickets, it's stop doing that. Stop doing that, because there were times during these conventions where I felt like I was being claustrophobic and overwhelmed, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't think you like it either, Jeff. I don't think anyone who goes to a convention wants to feel claustrophobic and feel like they've been backed into a corner and there's no way out. I don't like it. So fix your line control, get a better line of communication with your volunteers and the people who run the committees, so you know what the heck you're doing. Because it was chaotic, brother. It was. But hey, listen, we've talked about the positives. We've talked about the negatives of what are known as big conventions, such as New York Comic Con or Galaxy Cons or Awesome Cons or, you know, Lexington Comic and Toy Convention. My experience has for the 9 times out of 10, it's been positive. I've never had a problem with Lexington. They keep the lines going. They know where the lines are going to be. They put up the velvet. They put up the ropes. They put up the, what do you call those things? The steel bars and the guardrails. Like, they know what they're doing. Specifically now that they've put Celebrity Row in the Rupp Arena next to the hotel. So they are very, like, for the most part, like, they run a really good tight ship. So 2 thumbs way up, in the words of Siskel and the late Siskel and the late Roger Ebert. But anyhow, let's move on to something known as, am I missing something here, Jeff? Is there one more?
Well, there were a couple of things I was going to say on what you were talking about, was with the big conventions. So unfortunately, that's obviously you're going to get these big names and they're big draws. You're going to get a big crowd. If you're not a big crowd person, I usually just say I don't know what to tell you. I fully expect to be huddled and everything else. I'm kind of used to big crowds. I don't mind the long lines, stuff like that, just because, I grew up going to Six Flags Great America. You could be on a line for 2 to 3 hours just to ride one ride. I grew up going to rock concerts when I was starting out at 15. So I'm used to being jammed into a really small area with a bunch of people moving around me. So I've learned to kind of cope with that. I don't have that, I don't get claustrophobic. I think the only time when it gets really difficult is when you're standing next to everybody and there's the air is kind of more warm and musky. That's where I start to be like, okay, I need to get a little breath of fresh air, literally, and kind of clear out. But I don't know. I guess I'm just disciplined and patient when it comes to those things. But I was going to say was a couple of things, and then we can move into the small convention side of the discussion. Number one, what I've learned is if you have an experience like, let's say I was at New York last year when Michael J. Fox's line was being organized and everything. It got very, very chaotic very quickly. It's Michael J. Fox. I mean, and we all know his condition is getting worse and worse each day. And it's a blessing that this I would even say this young man, but he's almost 60 now, but this iconic man to come and go to a convention like New York Comic-Con, it has to be extremely demanding for him. And to be able to spend several hours with us as fans, I think is just an absolute blessing because, I've seen where he's at and I've gotten to see him in person. And, you start to say, okay, I think you might want to, have some time for yourself now. He's such a gracious person that he wants to make all of his fans happy, every single person who waited in line for him. But at one point, the line just started funneling hard into the opening of the curtain to get into the roped line in, and it got very nasty. It's New York, so a lot of colorful language was being used. People in wheelchairs were almost getting tipped over. It got pretty intense. I was right in the thick of things at that point, and I've been a bouncer at bars, and I know crowd control, and I knew that they were losing control there. So I did pitch in and try to at least make way for the families with little kids next to them and the folks in wheelchairs that, hey, there's somebody here, back off, like spread out, But it did get to that. There was an intense moment where, 600 people were trying to jam into a space that might fit 50. So, I've seen that happen. But I think what really helps a convention, and Ryan, you brought it up as well, is the communication. I think what we have to remember is okay, we had an experience like this, but speak up. Make sure that after you go to a convention and you have an experience like that, go on to the Facebook group and express that, or send an email and say, hey, could you please create a situation so that this doesn't happen again? Because that's the only way a convention is going to improve what their standard operating procedures. Otherwise, they're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again because they just figure, hey, it worked last time, it's going to work this time. Sometimes, like you have a group, iconic gentlemen like Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox, and the excitement and everything. He's here. Everybody just kind of bum rushes the front of the curtain because they're excited and they have their autograph ticket or their photo op ticket, and it's a small space right there. So going on and saying, hey, I had this experience. Can we please not have this happen again? I think is a major help, especially for a company like Reed Pop. They're producing shows that are drawing ticket sales over 100,000 general admission ticket sales before the VIP sales. Now, there does come to I think conventions do need to find a balance between how many VIP tickets they sell with the VIP privilege of jumping lines and stuff. I think they need to keep that in check a little bit, just because, once we get into smaller conventions, I'll talk about this, that can create a very long wait time for those people who showed up 2 hours before the show to get in line to see that one person that they came out for. And I can give you a very specific example once we get into the next part of the show. But I think that's where we as attendees and convention goers have to speak up and say, hey, this is what happened. Can you try to find a way to improve this? Because if we don't speak up, and it's not just, I'm going to write all this negative stuff and bash this convention, try to keep that in check too, because once you get into that, people stop reading what you wrote. So try to avoid the complaint list of 12 paragraphs. Cut it down to like a few sentences of like, hey, this is what happened. We need to be reminded that, safety and enjoyment of the show is number one. So I think that's a big part of the process. I don't know if it's a negative or a positive, but you can take a negative and turn it into a positive, obviously. So, but yeah, I mean, with the small conventions, sometimes you see conventions that are like to the T, well planned out, well executed and everything. And then there's other conventions that are still working on, working out the kinks and figuring out what works and what doesn't. So, I think that's where we're headed, right, Ryan? We want to get into the small conventions now. Say like,
well, where we're going, we don't need roads. And for those of you just joining us, this is Convention Chronicles, hosted by Ryan and Jeff at Neuroculture Channel. Do not forget to like and share this with all your closest friends. If you have any thoughts or feelings or opinions about big conventions or small conventions, some of the things that you've experienced going to these events, let us know your thoughts. Let us know your questions in the comments. And if you're joining us live on the replay, thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of this discussion, because these are great topics. And if you have an idea for a topic that you would like for us to discuss on a future episode of Convention Chronicles, let us know about it. Let us hear from you on our social media channels or here in the comment section below, and we look forward to hearing from you. With that being said, one more thing I'll say here: big conventions, not only do they get big name celebrities, but they get some of the biggest names in comic books. For example, yes. GalaxyCon, they had Mark Waid, they had Jeremy Clark, they had Jim Sternerico. They had some other big names in the comic book industry, and that's a cool thing. If you ever get a chance to meet some of these legends, please do, by all means, because they've been in the industry for decades and decades. They've seen the good, bad, and the ugly. See, there's a movie title for you right there. Speaking of Clint Eastwood, we were talking about him earlier. I don't think it's nice you laughing. Anyway, that's my best Eastwood impression you're going to get here at this particular time. Eastwood's got some good Westerns, though, man. Yeah. Gosh, he's got some good Westerns. But anyway, so big conventions, those are our thoughts. Those are our feelings. If you have any thoughts about it, let us know. So small conventions, right? We've been to, gosh, man, I've been to so many small conventions in my Comic-Con experiences. For example, this is how my brother Jeff and I met. I believe we met at, what was it, Shore Leave, I think.
Yes.
So Shore Leave, and by the way, this is going to be a good example of talking about small conventions. There are 4, if not 5 small, if you want to call them, small conventions that are held in the Delta Marriott Hotel in Hunt Valley, Maryland, right off 83 on Schwann Road. Yep. There you go. There's your geography right there. So in February, they have Farpoint. Mm-hmm. In July, they have Shore Leave, which is how Jeff and I met. Yep. Then about a month or 2 later, they have the Mid-Atlantic Nostalgia Convention, which, by the way, that is tons of fun, brothers and sisters. That convention is flipping fun. You want to go back in the Wayback Machine? You want to jump in a DeLorean and go 88 miles per hour and see some serious stuff and go back to 1955? You're going to find all kinds of memorabilia and more from like the 30s all the way to the 70s. I mean, I'm telling you, that convention covers so much ground, with all due respect. And the other thing is, in the month of October, we mentioned this earlier, Monster Mania is another one. So much so that Monster Mania now occupies that hotel not once, but twice a year. They do a show in April, I think it is, and then they do another one in October or somewhere around there. So Monster Mania, if you're into horror, If you're into horror movies or thrillers or psychological bloodbaths, check out Monster Mania because they'll take all your money, right? Isn't that right, Jeff? Because they've taken your money in the past. So
Yeah, they sure have.
They sure have. Well, let's talk about small conventions here for just a moment. So for me, small conventions definitely have a lot more positives. Number one of them being you get a more intimate experience with the celebrities. You get to talk to them a little bit more. You get to ask them a few more questions, and they're really chill, really laid back. They're not as uptight. You look a bit tense, pent up even. Some celebrities are there just to make a quick buck. For the most part, at small conventions, you get lines, yes, but once you get in line and you have the conversation, they're good conversations.
Yeah.
Like, they're really good conversations. I've had some really good most of the conversations I have are intelligent people anyway, but the ones you get at small conventions, you get more bang for your buck. And the other thing is, sometimes when you get an admission pass to a convention, you can get a free signature on Saturdays or a free signature on Sundays, which is what they do with Shore Leave in the month of July, which, by the way, you can find out more about those guys at shore-leave.com. That's where you can find out more information about them. Great show, great people over there. So some conventions do that in terms of being a small event. Also, you don't have as many people there, so you don't feel like you're being as overwhelmed. You feel like you're being claustrophobic. And also, the vendors are so cool, laid back, and they're always willing to talk to you. And you get a lot of writers at these conventions too. That's one of the best things about small conventions. You get a lot more vendors that are more smaller fish or people who have been looking to get into certain shows for a long time, and Shore Leave or maybe Farpoint or some of the other ones that we've mentioned here on the show or some of their first ones. I actually met some vendors that were at Shore Leave for their first time. That was their first show they ever did. And I asked them, I said, how's your experience? How have you been doing? How are the sales? How are the numbers? And they said, the people here are great. And we've had like some of the highest amount of sales we've ever had. And I'm like, well done. That's what I want. Indie supports indie. And this is another thing in small conventions, support small businesses when you can. Support small businesses because small conventions have great vendors, and they're some of the most creative and very passionate fans too. Like, you can meet fans of any kind at conventions and still have good conversation with them at the big shows. But when you're at smaller shows and you're in line for a bit, you get to talk to people, and then you get to talk to the vendors outside of that. And then you start to make all these dots start connecting. All these threads start to tie into one another. And I tell you, it's a thing of beauty. So those have been the experiences that I've had at small shows, is that you get to talk to celebrities a bit more, and you also get to learn more about them too. So it's been more of an intimate experience. So those are my examples of what I think you can get from attending or being a part of small conventions. Now, dare I ask, because I feel like this is the Jeff show for this entire episode of Convention Chronicles. But listen, this guy's been around for 400 years. He's seen a lot of things. So, Jeff, I'm going to ask you, what have been your positive or negative experiences with small conventions at different places?
So usually I try to stay within like a 3-hour-ish radius of where I live. I live in central Pennsylvania in Harrisburg. So getting down to Shore Leave is a little bit more of about an hour's drive for me. So when I came across Shore Leave, I thought it was really cool because like you said, the intimacy, the smaller atmosphere, there's much more interaction. You actually see some of the passion of not just the fans come out when speaking with those guests and those vendors, but they also share their passions or even agree with you at times and talk about the things, behind the scenes that you didn't know about or anything like that. I think that's where the fun comes in at those shows for me. Plus, what I like about the smaller shows is they know that they're small, so they organize it in a way that it's centered on like one particular fandom. Like I know that before East Coast Comic-Con went away, the owner would try to center in on like one specific pop culture show or movie I remember one being centered around Batman the Animated Series, where he had several guests, just talents that were just people who worked on the show or were guests on that show and were related in some way, so that you could meet them and you could do a quick cast sign piece and pretty much be done with it by the time you leave. I kind of like when that happens, because then I don't have to go to 3 or 4 other shows just to get the other signatures I'm trying to get on something when I'm working on a cast sign piece. I like when that happens. So shows like Shore Leave and East Coast Comic Con, Eternal Con, even Terrific Con. I would say Terrific Con's kind of a happy medium convention. Monster Mania, again, I wouldn't say it's a small convention by any means, because it draws a lot of people, but they have a way of centering in on a certain part of that genre and trying to get as many guests who are related to a certain project. Like earlier this month, Monster Mania did a very brilliant thing by bringing in four gentlemen from the Lost Boys, and it was headlined by Kiefer Sutherland. Obviously Kiefer Sutherland is a big name. He's a big draw. He's not a name you see on the comic convention scene very often. So, I think when you talk about long lines, Kiefer Sutherland's line on Saturday was 7 hours. I waited 7 hours to get Kiefer Sutherland's signature. But what Monster Mania does is they make allowances for people who are standing on a line that long. So if you're with somebody, and this is a big tip to all of you who go to these shows and stand on these lines for so long, a little tip: go with a friend, go with a relative, go with somebody who wants to go with you and wants to experience this with you, because then what you can do is have one person be a placeholder in line, so that another person can either get a break, go get water, go use the restroom, or go get another guest out of and get them out of the way, so that you can come back in line and switch off. That was something my brother and I started doing at New York in 2017, and that's what I do. A lot of times I get a friend or a helper or somebody to say, hey, can I have like 10 people I want to see today. Can you please stay here? I'll be back, and then we can flip flop and you go and see who you want to see too. That's a big little tip I can give out to everybody there. But yeah, I think it's really cool. Shore Leave was awesome because it was very intimate. They did the old school way of, hey, you bought a ticket to be here, you get a complimentary autograph with your admission. I love that idea. I wish we saw more of that, because I do think that in some cases, in some convention cases, we don't know how much somebody's going to be charging until we show up, and then we're on a certain budget for the show, and now we have to figure out whether or not we're going to get this person or not. I do see a lot of repeat guests when it comes to the smaller conventions. So, if you don't get that person that day, you're probably going to see that person again, maybe in the next month or two. So I do like that about the small conventions as well. I like the panels at small conventions get to be a little bit more animated and kind of behind the scenes and intimate. I like that about the smaller conventions, and I like how friendly the staff are. They're very, like Ryan said, very laid back, and they're there's certain conventions where it's going to be a kind of a chill experience. You're there for a little bit, and then you get going. And I love Hunt Valley for a different reason. I actually lived in Cockeysville for 2 years when I was a full-time teacher in Baltimore City, and I got to know the area. So it's nice to go back to an area that I'm familiar with, and go to a couple of local restaurants that I enjoy down there and stuff like that. So I like that about the Hunt Valley area, especially. So I like those smaller conventions because you don't need 4 days to get everything done that you went to go for. You can get it done in a day and go home and rest. You don't have to get a hotel and have those extra expenses. You can go in, get everything done in a day's time, and then you go home happy and say, oh yeah, here's what I got and here's what I added. And I think it's fun, especially because, when you go to a convention like Terrificon or Baltimore, they're not so much smaller conventions because they do draw 15 to 20,000 to maybe even 30,000 people. But they're more geared towards certain parts of the industry of the entertainment industry or the pop culture industry. Like Baltimore and Terrificon are more focused on the comic industry. So they'll bring out legends like Steranko and Claremont. And like Ryan said, if you have an opportunity to meet Steranko or Claremont or Romita, do it, because these are guys who created what we're now seeing on big screens 30, 40 years later. And they're not, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but they're not going to be around forever. Don't take it for granted. I mean, look at Stan Lee. Everybody thought he would be around forever. Unfortunately, whoever got to see him up until 2018 had the blessing of meeting the legend himself, and now he's not around anymore. And, I think when a person who spent that many years of their lives trying to create different things to keep us entertained and now got to the point where it's on Hollywood's big spotlight, I think it's amazing. So when you get a chance to speak with Chris Claremont, who wrote X-Men comics from the late 60s into the 70s, he had an incredible run during that time. He wrote the big Phoenix Saga storyline that we've seen Hollywood try twice to make a movie and not do so well with. And then he also had a big run from the 80s into the 90s. All that the X-Men was the number one book for the majority of those years, and he had a hand in writing all of those stories. Artists like Jim Lee got their start by working with Chris Claremont on X-Men. So there's a lot of different history that you can experience, especially at a smaller show like a Terrificon, like a Baltimore Comic-Con, and meet these incredibly legendary writers and artists who are still around, who are still showing up and making the appearances to meet the fans, to talk about what they did and how it's now translated into a TV show or a movie. It's a really cool conversation that you can have. And, remember, they created your childhood and you might not even know that. You might have been coming home from school and flipping on Batman in the animated series or X-Men, and you had no idea who Chris Claremont was or Bruce Timm was until you got older and you're like, oh my God, that's who that was. I had a funny interaction with a couple of buddies. I was like, we were sitting at a local establishment down the road, and Oingo Boingo came on, and I'm like, you guys have to know who the big name who came out of Oingo Boingo is, right? And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, Danny Elfman? Like, you guys don't know who Danny Elfman is? No, I don't know Elfman. And I'm like, okay, do you know Batman? He wrote the soundtrack to Batman. He wrote he wrote the opening to The Simpsons and Batman the animated series. And a lot of times these things kind of fly under the radar until you go to a convention, and then you start hearing these names and putting them together. And those smaller conventions give you that opportunity to make those connections. Whereas like when you do go to a big convention, you're being shuttled through and you got to be prepared for your 2-minute interaction. That's it. It's one and done. Whereas you go to like a shore leave, yeah, the line might be long at first, but you can come back like on a Sunday where it's really chill and they don't have a line, and you're just standing there talking to them for 10 minutes. You walk away hugging them. I had a friend, we went to that shore leave that Ryan mentioned. He specifically came out to meet oh man, help me out here. Lois Lane in Smallville.
Oh, you mean
I should
Erica
know this.
Durant?
Erica Durant.
Yeah,
He specifically, yeah. My friend came all the way down from Pittsburgh area just to meet Erica Durant, and he told her how much he was a fan of hers. She got up from the table and ran around the table and just gave my friend Bill the biggest hug. And you're never going to see that at New York Comic Con. You're not going to see Chris Evans jump up and be like, "Come here, kid." You know, that was, you know, you're not going to see that because there's not enough time. But at a show like Shore Leave or Terrificon or Baltimore or, you know, even Awesome Con. Awesome Con is a big show, Ryan, but I would actually put Awesome Con into the middle with like Baltimore and Terrificon, because you still have those opportunities. Yeah, in some lines they can be really long, like David Tennant's line was massive, or the New Day, you know, only had maybe a brief moment with those guys, but there were other lines where you could have that interaction with some of those other guests. Whereas, you know, but even at the big shows, it happens too. You catch them at the right time, or you wait to be one of the last guests. New Jersey HorrorCon and Monster Mania, I love those shows because they're genre specific, and you get an opportunity to meet big names in those genres. And one experience I had, which it's one of the best ones I ever had. I got to meet Sean Astin at New Jersey HorrorCon. And New Jersey, it's a decent show. It draws probably 8,500 to 10,000 people for the weekend, maybe a little bit more. I might be wrong. But it was really cool because I waited until I was the last person. And the reason why I did that was I had a poster I had a full-size Rudy poster that I wanted him to sign, and I wanted him to include the 5'0" speech. I played football when I was in high school, and Rudy came out my junior year, and it was in 96, 97. And I remember that movie coming out, and I'm 5'9". I was a running back and a linebacker at the time. So, you know, yeah, these broad shoulders, go figure, he was a linebacker, right? I just remember waiting a couple of hours. I let everybody else go in front of me, and I showed Sean Astin this poster that I specifically ordered from the Real Rudy's website, Rudy Rudiger's website, and had it special ordered, where on one side of the poster in the field, Rudy himself wrote out the opening speech, the Newt Rockney speech, right? That's we're going to go inside. We're going to go outside. We're going to go. He wrote that whole speech out for me, signed it and everything. And then I went to New Jersey HorrorCon, and it arrived within days of the show. And I was like, I couldn't believe the timing. I brought this poster with me, and I went to meet Sean Astin. And if you've met Sean Astin at bigger shows like Steel City or New York Comic Con, he does those big shows, but he also does the smaller shows. And I was super, super lucky. I got him at a great time. He was still pretty relaxed. He wasn't tired. You know, I know that he's had issues where he cramped up a couple of times at some of the bigger shows. So I was really lucky. And I asked him, would you be willing to write out the 5'0" speech? And his handler was very adamant about him not doing it. But I said to him, if I tell you a story and it rings a little bit with you, would you be willing to write the story? He's like, all right, you've got my interest. And you got to remember that Sean Astin is a pretty you know, he's iconic. You know, he's been in Hollywood. He's a childhood actor from Goonies all the way through to this day. He's still relevant, and still, I mean, he was Bob in Stranger Things. You know, he's still ending up in roles that we recognize him and love him in. And he said, "All right, yeah, I'll play along. Let's hear this." So I had 3 or 4 minutes with him. And I told him the story about how I went from sleeping on couches in community college to teaching community college myself. And I have a really long-winded story about all of that, but I told that story to him, and he looked up at me and he goes, "For that, I'll do it." So I paid his regular fee of $60, and he wrote out the whole speech onto this poster. When I got my job at Penn State last year, that was the first thing I put on my wall, and because it means so much to me, and that's where the Comic-Con experience, especially the small shows, you can get something like that done. You gotta be prepared to kind of give your reasoning for it, because obviously the guest has a little bit more time, but they don't want to just do it for anybody. You better have something that you're willing to trade. So be prepared to kind of bear a little bit of your soul. As an Italian man, again, I don't cry, but you can get me emotional. You can get me to open up a bit. And that was one of those things where I still, to this day, as soon as I look at that poster, I think to myself, man, I had that interaction with somebody I grew up with, basically. And then I threw out the thing where, for so many years, I've been told I look like you. So if you ever need a stunt double, just give me a call. I was a gymnast in high school. I probably can break out a couple of things for you. He liked that. He got up, he gave me a hug, he shook my hand. He said, "Thank you for that." And that's something I'm never going to forget. So I do love those. I do love those smaller shows because you get those interactions. And another one that really rang out to me was I got to meet CM Punk. And that's a big one for me too, because again, growing up suburbs of Chicago, we had this. We were hearing us wrestling fans were hearing about this guy named CM Punk, and it took a few years, but he finally got to WWE, and we got to see what he was all about. And I went all the way out to Eternal Con in Nassau County in New York just to see CM Punk, and I was the only one wearing a Cubs hat in New York. And he's like, "You must be out of your mind." I said, "You're CM Punk. I got to represent my hometown, man." And he gave me a handshake and a hug too. Is like, those are the kind of interactions that you get at a smaller show that you're always going to remember. And, to see a hometown boy get to the level he's been, it's always something really cool to experience. So to have that ability to relay that to him was something I'll never forget. So I really love those smaller shows, just because, you get to have those interactions, like Ryan said, that intimacy. You get to have that. Yeah, it might be a line of a couple hundred people, but they will get through that line, but they're there for you. And it's not like you don't feel like a cattle being herded through the chains and everything. But I do try to have those interactions even at the big shows too. But I know my limits. I know how to be real quick too after so long. But obviously, I can be a long-winded person. This is why I became a social studies teacher and a history person, because, I can talk, and I'm a middle child. So this is why doing a show like this works for me, because I like having the attention and being able to tell stories and share and everything else. So, it gives me an opportunity to have another way to be myself and share and pass on knowledge and converse and everything else. So that's again the big thing for me about just conventions in general is just that we're all the same, and it's one big happy community where there's going to be frustrations. Obviously, we're going to trip over each other, or whatever, but we're all there because we love that specific person we're in line to see, whether it's a photo op, whether it's an autograph, or just walking through and checking out the vendors. Absolutely, they're just like us. They're there because they're fans, and they have small businesses, and it's meeting the legendary comic book writers and artists. It's a one-stop shop for a pop culture kid, so that's what I like about it. So
this is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Absolutely.
the way, brother. That's just the way. So there's another reference there for you. But no, thank you for sharing that with us. And if you have any thoughts about this, you who are watching or listening to this, if you've gone to big conventions, maybe some of the smaller conventions that are out there, and you've had experiences, whether they be positive or negative or somewhere in between, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. And don't forget to like and share this with all of your closest friends. This episode of Convention Chronicles, hosted by Ryan and Jeff here at Nerd Culture Channel. So for me, one other thing I'll bring up about small conventions, and this is one of the beauties of small conventions. We mentioned it earlier about meeting the vendors and stuff, and maybe buying some of their work, maybe purchasing some of their work or whatever it is. You develop like good friendships with the vendors too, because when they come back, if they sign a deal to come back for next year, you get to see them again. So basically, what I'm telling you is that big and small conventions, there's one thing they all have in common. It's like a family reunion every time you get together.
Mhm. Yeah.
Whether it's at a big show like Awesome Con, whether it's at one of the bigger shows like New York Comic Con in the flippin' Javits Center, boy, that's chaotic. Or you're hanging out with your peeps in a smaller venue, as a hotel would be, where Shore Leave and Farpoint, Monster Mania, and all this other stuff. By the way, waited in line for 7 flippin' hours to meet Jack Bauer. That's way too long, man. Like, that is just, listen, I'm willing to wait a certain amount of time, but patience can run thin. So, in other words, one of the biggest lessons to come out of this conversation for you who may be watching or listening to this, when you're planning a convention, you must choose. Choose wisely. For as the short lines can bring you life, the long lines can take it from you. So, there you go. That's the best way to describe it. But listen, I've made some great friends over the years going to smaller conventions. The vendors who were there at their first show for example, whether it's Farpoint or Shore Leave or Monster Mania, any of those shows, they keep coming back to me and they say, this show, we met so many wonderful people. We sold out on Saturday, or we sold out on Friday. Like, when I hear that stuff, I'm not even working for the company. I'm not working for the business. I don't even work for the convention. But when I hear vendors having such good sale numbers, and they're sold out on a Friday or even a Saturday to the point where they don't even have any merch left for Sunday, or they barely have any left for Sunday, that's good business. And we want to keep that business rolling in, because when word of mouth spreads, it's good for everybody. It's publicity. So look it up, check your local listings, look up some of these big conventions that we threw out to you, whether it be the Awesome Cons, the New York Comic Cons that Jeff has been to one too many of those, and I'm jello of that, or you've been to Shore Leave. And by the way, the fact that your friend met Erica Durant and she came out of her booth and gave him the biggest hug the world has ever seen, dude, you're getting a hug from Lois Lane. I mean, how could
I was jealous. I was like,
damn
it. I felt like Jack Bauer. Damn it. I was like, this guy pulled it off.
Did you drop some Jack Bauer on him after that? You're like, damn it, Chloe.
Well,
did you drop that on him? Did you drop a Jack Bauer little rant on him afterwards?
With Kiefer, for me, Kiefer Sutherland is.
Was he cool when you got up to his line after waiting?
He's as cool as can be. He's as cool as can be. Totally calm. Yeah. Oh, how nice to see you.
Did you have
very
him sign
welcoming.
or was it all Lost Boys for you?
So Lost Boys, don't get me wrong, great movie.
Good movie though.
It's iconic. I remember watching it when I was like 7, and I've seen it multiple times since then. Yeah, I mean that's a classic for me, but obviously 24, just seeing the resurgence of Kiefer Sutherland run with Jack Bauer for 9 years. I enjoyed Designated Survivor, the 2 years that it was on ABC.
I think Phone Booth is a great movie too that he was in.
Oh, it's intense. Oh, so he's such a talented guy that he knows how to turn up the intensity. Like, you think that this is the level of Kiefer Sutherland. No, this. Flatliners. I think Flatliners is the one where I really kind of caught on to him. Yeah, because I think it probably was around when I was like 9 or 10. I had a bit of more of an understanding, and I just thought that was it was such a layered way of telling the story, and the intensity of what these people were experiencing after they were daring each other. Hey, I bet you I can go under for 45 seconds. No, I can do 60 seconds. Oh, I can do 75 seconds. They're trying to one up each other. I was a kid, so I had an older brother. We were always trying to one up each other, so I could relate to that dopiness of who's the toughest and the strongest. And I won when I turned 16, by the way, but that's a long story, and I'm pretty sure my older brother would probably still argue to this day. But anyway,
but hey, Flatliners is a good film. It's definitely better than the remake.
Yep. Oh, yeah. That's one of those movies you just can't remake,
had a
dude.
decent cast within it too, because it had now known as Elliot Page. She was Ellen Page at that point. And you also had Diego Luna from Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Cassian Andor was in that, and I'm like, it's a good cast, right? And then all of a sudden, it just fizzled.
It's a tough story to retell.
That happens a lot
originally. Yeah, but Flatliners was one of those where I really caught on to them. The funny thing is a lot of people were there for Young Guns because McDermott was there and Lou Diamond Phillips were there. But again,
nice guy too.
Yeah, I didn't get to meet him that day, but I heard really good things. But I think I didn't really get to. Young Guns came out probably a little too early for me, and my buddy's like, "Dude, you never saw Young Guns?" And I'm like, "No." But then I was old enough to watch and fall in love with Unforgiven and Tombstone to the point where, do I want to watch Young Guns and then end up saying, well, I still love Tombstone more, So I don't want to kind of sour that, but I'll probably flip it on this weekend now that I brought it up. But Kiefer Sutherland to me was one of those coolest actors. Like there's the cool group like Brad Pitt, Kiefer's another one. Just really just chill, cool guys, right? So to be in a room and because it was 7 hours long, I don't really want to get into the whole, I think Monster Mania should do this, and this. That's neither here nor there. I'm sure they've gotten their feedback. They don't need mine. I'm not really, I'm not here to really go into all the greats and the lows, the highs and the lows type thing. But I do think, the little bit of time I did get to spend with him, I just said, Kiefer, lifetime fan of yours, grew up with you. And then I said, I made the mistake. I asked him, is Rabbit Hole going to come back? And, his answer was very I don't want to say political, but it was very middle of the road, like, oh, that's up to what happens after the writer's strike, buddy. And that was it. I was like, oh okay, yeah. I forgot we're not supposed to talk about current projects, so I made that mistake.
UT very hush hush. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
LA Confidential there for you.
Yep. See, what I heard was with the writer's strike going on, that all celebrity guests can go and attend and be a part of Comic-Con or pop culture conventions. They just can't talk about current projects or future projects because that's part of the strike terms. So that's one thing we have to remind our viewers and our fellow congoers is when you're in a panel, keep in mind, if you ask that question, hey, I really love season 3, when are we going to get season 4? We're going to have to just wait out the writer's strike. That's probably the answer you're going to get. So just keep that in mind.
It's a bummer, but that's the state of affairs that we're in. But hey, the positive side is when you go to a convention and you meet someone who shares the same passion for a certain fandom that you do, stick with that person. If they're a positive, you get positive vibes off them, you get good energy off that person. Hey, stick with them because you can become lifelong friends like the two hosts of this particular show known as Convention Chronicles. And I want to thank you for joining us for this episode. Jeff, you're insightful. And you got a lot of stuff to bring to the table, and we appreciate you doing so. Where can the person watching or listening to this follow you online and all the great things you got going on? What do you got?
Sure. So this time I picked up on my friend Ryan's examples. So my personal pages, I'm pretty easy to find if you just type in icon722 in either Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You'll find me pretty easily. And then for my business page, it's Iconic Autographs and Inscriptions. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and that's where I try to help folks out who can't go to conventions and are trying to get those autographs that they haven't been able to get on their own. So I help them out as best as I can. So that's me, buddy.
That's fantastic, and we appreciate you being here, Jeff. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Convention Chronicles. If you got something out of it, that's great. If there's a future topic you want us to discuss, by all means, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. Reach out to either one of us on social media. I'll be more than happy to hear your feedback on that.
Absolutely.
So my name is Ryan of Neuroculture. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RyanRPM5. Also, you can follow us at Neuroculture Channel on YouTube, and all the other links to our social media channels are located within the description of this episode and our past videos as well. Got a lot of great things coming your way very soon here at the channel, so like, comment, share, subscribe, ring that bell to be notified when our new videos go up and they go live. Once we hit 1,000 subscribers, we're going to throw a great big live celebration with returning guests, some surprise guests, and some special giveaways. But the only way we can do that is if we hit when we hit 1,000. So you got to tell your friends about us, because they're going to tell their friends, and they tell their friends, and so on. So on and so on. You know how these things go. And remember, going to a convention can be fun, but it can be even more fun when you go to conventions with friends and family and all that good stuff. Enjoy this episode. Enjoy your week. Enjoy your weekend wherever you may be in the world. And hey, life's better when going to conventions than just geeking out or nerding out. Am I right? Yeah, I think I am. Thanks, guys.
Good morning. Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.